The hydraulic hiss of the blast door sealing shut was the only sound Cale found comforting anymore. It meant the day was over. It meant the rust-colored smog of Iridian 9 was locked outside, along with the scavengers, the spice heads, and the desperate freighter pilots begging for credit he did not have. Inside the garage, the air smelled of ozone, burnt grease, and the stale, metallic tang of recycled oxygen. It was a poor substitute for fresh air, but on a mining planet halfway to the galactic rim, fresh air was a luxury reserved for the corporate domes floating 5 miles above the surface. Cale wiped his hands on a rag that was greasier than his fingers. He was 38 standard years old, though the mirror in the washroom insisted he was 50. His eyes were dark, ringed with the permanent exhaustion of a man who slept in 4-hour shifts, and his jaw was covered in a rough stubble that had given up on being a beard. He tossed the rag onto a workbench cluttered with hydrospanners and fusion coils. The shop was quiet. Shadows stretched long across the concrete floor, thrown by the flickering halogen strip that had been dying for 6 months. He really needed to fix that light. He needed to fix a lot of things. The thermal regulator on the south wall was rattling. The inventory drone was flying in circles again, and his bank account had exactly 42 credits left in it. Enough for a week of protein paste, or 3 days if he wanted the stuff that actually tasted like food. He sighed, the sound scraping against the silence. He should go upstairs to the loft, heat up a ration pack, and pass out until the morning alarm screamed at him. But his mind was too loud. The memories of the war, of the smoke over the colony at Vexia, were always louder when the shop was quiet. Instead of sleeping, he decided to scavenge. He grabbed a heavy magnetic flashlight and keyed the lock on the back door. This exit led directly into the alleyway, a narrow throat of darkness sandwiched between his garage and the looming, windowless backside of a refinery. It was where the wind deposited all the trash from the upper levels. Sometimes, if the currents were right, you could find discarded tech, burnt-out power cells that still held a charge, or rare metals stripped from crashed skiffs. Cale stepped out into the gloom. The air here tasted like sulfur. Above, the sky was a bruised purple, choked with the exhaust of 1,000 liftoff thrusters. He clicked the light on. The beam cut through the swirling dust, illuminating piles of twisted rebar and crushed shipping crates. He moved with the practiced caution of a man who knew that back alleys on Iridian 9 were hunting grounds. His boots crunched on broken glass. He scanned the debris, looking for the glint of copper or the blue sheen of localized force field generators. Nothing. Just trash. He was about to turn back, to surrender to the inevitability of the protein paste, when he heard it. It was a sound so soft it should have been swallowed by the distant hum of the refinery turbines. It was a shuffle, a scrape of fabric against stone. Cale froze. His hand drifted instinctively to the heavy wrench hanging from his belt. He did not carry a blaster. Blasters escalated things. A wrench just ended them. "Who's there?" Cale stated. It was not a question. The shadows near a collapsed ventilation duct shifted. For a moment, he thought it was a rad rat, one of the massive, hairless rodents that infested the lower levels. But rats did not wear clothes. A figure detached itself from the darkness. It was small, huddled against the cold duracrete. Cale swung the light, pinning the intruder in the harsh white beam. He expected a thief. He expected a junkie looking for a fix. He did not expect a girl. She looked to be in her late teens, though with organics it was hard to tell. She was drowning in a robe that was several sizes too big, a tattered garment of heavy gray weave that looked like industrial packing material. But it was her face that made Cale's grip on the wrench loosen. She was covered in gray dust, her skin pale and streaked with grime. But beneath the dirt, she had an ethereal quality that did not belong in a back alley on a mining world. Her hair was a chaotic mess of silver and white, and even in the gloom, Kale could see faint bioluminescent strands pulsing with a weak, rhythmic blue light. She shielded her eyes from his flashlight with a hand that looked too delicate to lift a hydro spanner. When she lowered it, Kale felt a jolt go through his chest. Her eyes were not human. They were large, encompassing nearly half her face, and they lacked pupils. Instead, they were swirling pools of silvery pink liquid, iridescent and terrified. She looked at the wrench in his hand, then up at the light, and finally at his face. She shivered, a violent tremor that shook her entire small frame. Then, she spoke. Her voice was a raspy whisper, like dry leaves skittering over pavement. "Any leftover sandwiches?" Kale blinked. He stared at her. The absurdity of the question posed in this hellhole by a creature who looked like she had fallen out of a dream short-circuited his cynicism. "What?" Kale asked. "Sandwiches," she repeated, her voice cracking. She mimed the action of eating, her hands shaking uncontrollably. "Please." Kale lowered the flashlight. He looked at the alley, checking for an ambush. No one used a girl like this as bait. It was too distinctive. If someone wanted to jump him, they would just shoot him from the roof. He looked back at her. She was leaning heavily against the wall, favoring her left side. A dark stain was spreading across the fabric of her robes near her hip. Blood, or whatever fluid kept her alive. "I don't have sandwiches," Kyle said, his voice gruff. He hated how harsh he sounded. "I have synthetic bread and protein filler." "Food," she whispered. The hope in that single word broke something in Kale's chest. He jerked his head toward the open door of the garage. "Inside. Before the patrols see you." She hesitated, her silvery eyes darting to the darkness behind him. She was hunted. Kale recognized that look. He saw it in the mirror every morning. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said, softer this time. "Come on." She pushed herself off the wall, stumbling. Kale stepped forward to catch her, but she flinched away, a sharp, feral movement. She righted herself, breathing hard, and limped past him into the shop. Kale closed the door and locked it. He engaged the heavy deadbolt and the magnetic seal. Then he turned to look at his guest. In the better light of the garage, she looked even worse. The bioluminescence in her hair was fading in and out, like a dying battery. Her lips were cracked. The stain on her hip was a deep, vibrant violet. Kale motioned to the stool beside his main workbench. "Sit. Don't touch anything sharp." He went to the small kitchenette he had rigged up in the corner. He grabbed 2 slices of dense brown synthetic bread and slapped a thick slab of reprocessed soy meat between them. It was dry, tasteless, and packed with enough calories to keep a miner working for 12 hours. He brought it to her. She snatched it from his hand with shocking speed. She did not eat like a person. She ate like a starving animal, tearing at the bread, hardly chewing. Crumbs fell onto her lap, but she didn't notice. Kyle watched her, leaning his hip against a tool cabinet. He grabbed a bottle of water and set it down next to her. She drained it in 5 seconds. "Slow down," Kale warned. "You'll get sick." She ignored him, finishing the last bite of the sandwich. Then she stopped. She looked at her hands, then up at him. The frantic energy drained out of her, leaving her looking small and fragile again. "Thank you," she said. "You're welcome." Kyle replied. He grabbed a med kit from the shelf. "Now let me see that arm, and the hip." She pulled back, curling into a ball on the stool. "No," You're bleeding, Kale pointed out, gesturing to the violet stain. If that gets infected, you die. I don't want a corpse in my shop. Too much paperwork. It was a lie. Nobody filed paperwork on Iridian 9, but the pragmatic angle seemed to work. She slowly uncurled. She rolled up the sleeve of her robe. Her arm was slender, the skin almost translucent. A long, jagged gash ran from her elbow to her wrist. It wasn't a knife wound. It looked like a burn or a graze from a laser bolt. The tissue around it was angry and inflamed. Kyle hissed through his teeth. Nasty! Hold still! He applied a numbing spray. She flinched but didn't pull away. He cleaned the wound with antiseptic foam, which fizzed and turned gray as it hit the alien blood. She made a small, high-pitched sound in the back of her throat, like a whimper, but she kept her eyes locked on his face. I'm Kale, he said as he wrapped a synth flesh bandage around her forearm. She watched his hands. Aya. Aya. Kale tested the name. It was short, melodic. It didn't sound like any of the harsh guttural dialects native to this sector. Where did you come from, Aya? She clamped her mouth shut. The fear returned to her eyes, swirling like smoke. Fine, Kyle said. Keep your secrets. But if you brought trouble to my door, I need to know. No trouble, she whispered. Just ran. Kyle finished with the arm. Let me see the leg. She shook her head violently. No. It is okay. Kyle looked at the blood soaking her robe. It was definitely not okay, but he decided not to push her. Not yet. She was trembling again. He turned back to his workbench. He had been working on a compression coil for a heavy-duty gravedigger before he went outside. It was a complicated piece of junk, ancient tech that kept misaligning. He picked up the coil, frustratingly turning it over in his hands. Damn thing, he muttered. The stabilizer ring is warped. He felt a presence at his elbow. Aya had slid off the stool. She was standing next to him, staring at the coil. Her fear seemed to have evaporated, replaced by an intense, almost predatory curiosity. She reached out. Her fingers were long and slender. Don't, Kyle started. That's delicate. She ignored him. She touched the interface of the coil. Her fingers moved with a fluidity that made no sense for someone who had just been starving in an alley. She didn't use a tool. She simply pressed her fingertips against the magnetic seal and twisted. There was a soft click. The warped ring snapped perfectly into alignment. The coil hummed to life, glowing with a steady amber light. Kale stared at the machine, then at her. That repair would have taken him an hour of calibration. She had done it in 3 seconds. How did you do that? Kale demanded. Aya recoiled at the sudden volume of his voice. She stepped back, her hands flying up to cover her ears. Loud, she whimpered. Too loud. Kale lowered his voice immediately, holding up his hands in surrender. Sorry, I'm sorry, That was impressive tech work. She peeked out from behind her hands. It was singing wrong. I fixed the song. Singing, Kyle repeated flatly. He looked at the mechanical part. It was definitely not singing. It was vibrating at a frequency of 400 hertz. But to her, it was a song. He realized then that she wasn't just a runaway. She was something else entirely. You need sleep, Kyle said. He pointed to a cot in the corner of the room, usually reserved for when he worked triple shifts. Take the bed, I'll take the chair. Aya looked at the cot, then at him. You will not give me to them. Give you to who? Kyle asked. She didn't answer. She just stared at him with those silver-pink eyes waiting for a lie. I won't give you to anyone, Kyle said, and to his surprise, he meant it. Go to sleep, Aya. She moved to the cot and curled up on top of the blanket, not beneath it. She wrapped her rags tight around herself. Within minutes, her breathing slowed. Kyle sat in his chair, the magnetic wrench resting on his knee. He didn't sleep. He watched the shop monitors. He watched the street outside. Around 3 in the morning, Aya began to dream. It started as a low moan, then escalated into frantic whispering. She tossed on the narrow cot, her hands clawing at the air. Cale walked over to her, careful to keep his footsteps silent. She was speaking, rapid fire, in a language that made Cale's universal translator glitch. The small device in his ear let out a static whine as it tried and failed to parse the syntax. It wasn't standard galactic. It wasn't trade code. It sounded ancient, fluid, like water rushing over stones. Kel Tora, Niam, Virella, Shay. The bioluminescent strands in her hair flared bright blue, illuminating the corner of the garage. For a second, the monitors on Kyle's workbench flickered in sympathy. The lights overhead buzzed. Kyle reached out to shake her awake, then stopped. He remembered how she flinched. Instead, he tapped the metal frame of the cot. Aya, he said softly. You're safe. Wake up, she gasped, her eyes snapping open. She sat bolt upright, chest heaving. The glow in her hair dimmed instantly. She looked around, disoriented, before her gaze landed on Cale. I was back there, she whispered. You're here, Cale said. Iridian 9, my shop. You're safe. She nodded slowly, but she didn't go back to sleep. She pulled her knees to her chest and watched him until the sun came up. Morning on Iridian 9 was a brownish-gray affair. The light filtering through the dirty skylights was weak and depressing. Cale had already opened the front bay doors, letting the humid air circulate. He had hidden Aya in the back storage room, behind a stack of crates containing impulsive drive manifolds. Stay quiet, he had told her. If anyone comes in, you don't exist. She nodded, her eyes wide. Kyle was working on the undercarriage of a hover skiff when a shadow fell across his legs. He slid out on his creeper board, wiping grease from his cheek. 2 men stood in the entrance of the garage. The one in front was Karn. He was a local heavy, a mid-level enforcer for the Black Sun Syndicate. He had a cybernetic jaw that made his smile look like a bear trap, and he wore a coat made of lizard leather that probably cost more than Cale's entire shop. Behind him was a mountain of muscle and synthetic weave simply known as the Brute. Morning, grease monkey, Karn said. Carnal. His voice was metallic, filtered through the cheap modulator in his throat. Kyle stood up, grabbing a rag. He didn't smile. Karn, are you here to pay for that retro thruster job? You're 3 weeks late. Karn laughed, a sound like grinding gears. Business is slow, Cale. You know how it is, but today, I'm flush. I'm looking for something. I don't sell illicit mods, Cale said calmly. Try the lower district. Not a mod, Karn said. He stepped into the shop, his ocular implant whirring as it scanned the room. A girl, runaway, high-value target. The boss got a ping that she was in this sector. Cale's heart hammered against his ribs, but his face remained a mask of bored irritation. A girl? In this dump? You think I'm running a daycare? Karn walked over to the workbench. He picked up a wrench, weighing it in his hand. She's small, pale, weird eyes. Looks like she's starving, still worth 5 million credits alive. Half that dead. 5 million. Cale felt the number hit him like a physical blow. 5 million credits would buy a ticket off this rock. It would buy a new life. It would buy a villa on a terraformed ocean world where the air smelled like salt instead of sulfur. All he had to do was point to the storage room. Karn leaned in close, smelling of synthetic cologne and old blood. You seen her, Kale. Don't lie to me. I'll tear this place apart if I have to. Kale looked Karn in the eye. He thought of the sandwich. He thought of the way Aya had fixed the gravedigger. He thought of the bruises on her arm. I haven't seen anyone, Kale said, his voice steady. Just me and the rats. If a girl like that was here, I'd have sold her to you already. Karn stared at him for a long second. The cybernetic eye zoomed in, searching for a micro-tremor, a bead of sweat. Kale held the stare. He had looked down the barrel of an enemy rifle in the Vexian trenches. A low-rent thug didn't scare him. Right, Karn said finally. He dropped the wrench. It clattered loudly on the metal table. If she shows up, you call me. Don't try to be a hero. Kale. Heroes end up in the scrap heap. Get out of my shop, Karn, Kale said. Karn smirked and turned to leave. The brute grunted and followed. Kale watched them walk down the street until they disappeared into the smog. He let out a breath he had been holding for 2 minutes. He walked to the control panel and hit the button to close the bay doors. The shop plunged back into semi-darkness. He walked to the storage room. Aya was huddled behind the crates, shaking so hard her teeth were chattering. She had heard everything. You can come out, Kale said. She scrambled out, keeping low. She looked at the door, terrified Karn would come bursting back through. 5 million, Kale said, looking at her. That's a lot of money. Aya, who is looking for you? And don't give me the I don't know act. She stood up, hugging herself. Not criminals. They are hired hands. Hired by who? The facility, she whispered. I do not know the name. They kept me in a white room. They put needles in me. They made me touch machines. Kyle ran a hand through his hair. You're an escapee from a corporate black site? Do you have any idea how dangerous that is? I just wanted to leave, she said, tears welling in her silver eyes. I just wanted to see the sky. They never let me see the sky. Kale looked at her, really looked at her. She wasn't a spy. She wasn't a soldier. She was a kid who had been tortured for profit. The anger that flared in his chest surprised him. It wasn't annoying this time. It was rage. Rage at the people who had put that fear in her eyes. Sit down, Kyle ordered gently. I need to check that leg wound. You were favoring it again. She sat on the edge of the workbench. Kyle grabbed the medkit again. He knelt in front of her and gently pulled aside the heavy fabric of her robe. The wound on her thigh was ugly. It was deep, and the edges were cauterized, but it had split open during her run. Violet blood oozed sluggishly. This needs stitches, Kale said, or a dermal stapler. I only have the stapler and it's going to hurt. Aya nodded. She gripped the edge of the table. Kyle worked quickly. He cleaned the wound again, his hands steady. He positioned the stapler. Ready? Yes, she whispered. Clack. She gasped, her body jerking, but she didn't cry out. Kale moved the device. Clack. She squeezed her eyes shut. Clack. Done, Kale said. It's done. He applied a sealing gel over the staples. He began to wrap the bandage around her thigh. As he worked, he felt a hand rest lightly on his shoulder. He froze. He looked up. Aya was looking down at him. Her other hand reached out and took his, her fingers intertwining with his grease-stained ones. Her skin was cool, smooth as polished glass. You did not sell me, she said. For the 5 million? No, Kyle said. I didn't. Why? Kyle looked at the bandage. Because I don't like bullies. And I don't need the money that bad. It was another lie. He needed the money desperately. But looking at her now, seeing the trust tentatively forming in her alien eyes, the money felt dirty. Aya squeezed his hand. Her grip was surprisingly strong. Her voice dropped to a whisper, trembling with an emotion Kale couldn't quite place. "You are the first person who has touched me gently in years," she said. "At the facility, hands were only for holding me down. Or cutting." Kyle felt a lump form in his throat. He stood up, gently disengaging his hand, though he didn't want to. He needed distance. The vulnerability was too raw, too sharp. "Well," Kyle said, his voice rough, "you're not in the facility anymore. I'm going to go secure the back door. You get some rest." He walked away before she could say anything else. He needed the darkness of the back room. He needed to breathe. That night, the rain came. It hammered against the corrugated metal roof of the garage, a relentless, rhythmic drumming. Kale sat in his chair in the shadows, a glass of cheap synthetic whiskey in his hand. He watched the cot in the corner. Aya was asleep again. This time, she wasn't tossing or turning. She lay still, one arm draped over the side of the mattress. The bioluminescence in her hair cast a soft, soothing blue glow across the floor, pulsing in time with her heartbeat. Kale took a sip of the whiskey. It burned, but it didn't numb the feeling rising in his chest. He had spent the last 10 years pushing the world away. After Sarah died in the bombing, after the war, he had decided that caring was a tactical error. Caring got you killed. Caring got your heart ripped out. He was a mechanic. He fixed machines. Machines didn't bleed. Machines didn't cry. But as he watched the strange, glowing girl sleep, he felt the walls he had built around himself begin to crack. He remembered the way she had looked at him when he offered her the sandwich. He remembered the feel of her small, cold hand in his. He checked the safety on the heavy pistol he had taped under the table. Let Karn come back. Let the facility send their hit squads. Kale set the glass down. He wasn't going to sell her. He wasn't going to let them take her back to a white room with needles. Something deep and protective stirred in him. Something he thought long dead, buried in the rubble of a past life. It was a dangerous feeling, and it was a foolish feeling. But as the blue light of her hair danced in the dark, Kyle knew he was already in too deep to pull back now. "Sleep tight, Aya," he whispered to the darkness. Outside, the wind howled, carrying the promise of a storm. The rhythm of the garage shifted in the days that followed, for years. Kyle had moved through space with the heavy, plodding cadence of a man merely enduring the hours until he could drink himself into a stupor. But Aya changed the tempo. She was a quiet presence, yet she filled the empty spaces of the workshop with a strange, vibrant energy. She learned with a speed that was terrifying. On the second day, she watched Kale disassemble a fusion drive injector. On the third day, she handed him the tools before he even realized he needed them. By the fourth day, she was fixing components he had long ago consigned to the scrap heap. Kyle stood by the main workbench, wiping grease from a hydro spanner, watching her. Aya was hunched over a rusted navigation console from a dismantled freighter. The thing had been dead for a decade, its circuits fried by an ion surge. Kale had kept it only for spare copper. Aya hummed as she worked. It was not a melody Kale recognized. It was a series of oscillating tones, shifting in pitch and frequency, vibrating in the back of his teeth. She did not use a soldering iron. She used a small, fine-tipped probe, but mostly she used her hands, her fingers dancing over the charred circuit boards with impossible precision. "You are going to electrocute yourself," Kale said, though his voice lacked its usual bite. Aya did not look up. Her silver hair was tied back with a strip of oil-stained rag, revealing the nape of her neck where the faint blue bioluminescence pulsed in time with her humming. "The pathways are not broken," Aya said, her voice literal and serious. "They are just confused. They forgot the way home. I am reminding them." Kale snorted. "Machines don't get confused. Aya, they break. They wear out. Entropy gets us all in the end." "Entropy is lazy," she countered, finally glancing up at him with those large, silvery pink eyes. "It takes the path of least resistance. Life is stubborn. Systems are stubborn." She pressed her thumb against a darkened capacitor. There was a sharp snap, like a spark jumping a gap, and suddenly the navigation console flared to life. The screen, previously a cracked black void, washed the room in emerald light. Scrolling lines of code cascaded down the display, faster than a human eye could read. Kale stepped forward, stunned. "That creates a level 4 navigation solution? That unit is worth 2,000 credits in working condition." Aya shrugged, a gesture she had mimicked from him just yesterday. "It wanted to work, it was boring." Kale shook his head, fighting a smile. "You talk about them like they are pets." "They are," she said. "Noisy, demanding pets." She hopped off the stool, dusting off her oversized robes. She was still wearing the rough gray garments she had arrived in, though Kale had washed them in the sonic cleaner. They looked like potato sacks, but on her, they somehow possessed a regal drape. "Kale," she said, tilting her head. "What is a tax audit?" Kale groaned, rubbing his temples. "Something worse than death. Why?" "The news feed on the terminal says the planetary governor is facing one. I thought it was a disease." "It is a disease," Kale muttered. "It eats your wallet and your soul. Come on, let's eat. I actually bought real vegetables today. Don't get used to it." They sat on the metal stairs leading up to the loft, eating a stew that actually contained recognizable carrots. Aya ate with more restraint now, though she still treated every bite as if it might be her last. "Tell me one of your songs," Kyle said suddenly. The silence of the shop had started to feel heavy again. Aya looked at him, surprised. "My songs are not for ears. They are for other things." "Humor me," Kyle said. "I am tired of the sound of the wind." Aya set her bowl down. She closed her eyes. When she opened her mouth, the sound that came out was haunting. It was low and resonant, a polyphonic blend of notes that seemed to harmonize with itself. It sounded like the deep shifting of ice, or the groan of a starship hull under pressure, but woven into something beautiful. It made the hair on Kale's arms stand up. She stopped abruptly, looking self-conscious. "It is a song for the moons of Virella, to tell the tides when to turn." "It's beautiful," Kale said quietly. "Sad but beautiful." "Beauty and sadness are the same thing," Aya said simply. "You cannot have one without the fear of losing it." Kyle looked at her, struck by the weight of her words. She was a child in so many ways, naive about tax audits and sandwiches. Yet she carried the gravity of an ancient star system in her bones. That night, the nightmares returned with a vengeance. Kale was back in the colony square on Vexia. The sun was too bright. The laughter of the crowd was too loud. He was holding Sarah's hand. She was laughing at something he had said, her head thrown back, the sunlight catching the gold in her hair. Then came the flash. There was no sound at first, just a wall of white heat that erased the world. Then the pressure wave hit, shattering his ribs, throwing him backward into the dust. When the sound finally arrived, it was the roar of a dying world. He crawled through the smoke. He called her name, Sarah, Sarah, but there was only silence and the smell of burning ozone and meat. He found her hand, still wearing the silver band he had given her, but the rest of her was gone, lost in the crater where the government building had stood. Cale woke with a scream trapped in his throat. He sat up, gasping, his body drenched in cold sweat, his heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. He swung his legs out of bed, burying his face in his hands, trying to banish the image of the severed hand in the dust. Cale. The voice was soft, barely a whisper. He looked up. Aya was standing at the foot of his bed. She was not glowing tonight. She looked dark, solid, an anchor in the spinning room. "Go back to sleep, Aya," Cale croaked. "Just a bad dream." She stepped closer. She did not ask if he was okay. She did not offer platitudes. She simply reached out and placed her hand on his chest, right over his heart. Cale flinched, but he did not pull away. Through her palm, he felt a strange sensation. It was not hot. It was a calmness, a stillness that flowed from her skin into his. It felt like cool water washing over a burn. The frantic rhythm of his heart began to slow. The sharp, jagged edges of the memory dulled, receding into a gray fog. "Your pain is very loud," Aya whispered. "It screams like tearing metal." "I'm sorry," Cale said, his voice breaking. "I didn't mean to wake you." "It is heavy," she said, her eyes searching his face. "How do you carry it?" "I don't know," Cale admitted. "I just do. Because the alternative is stopping, and I'm not ready to stop." She looked at him for a long moment, her hand still on his chest. Then she nodded, as if accepting a technical explanation for a complex engine failure. "I will help you carry it," she said. She withdrew her hand and returned to her cot downstairs. Cale sat in the darkness for a long time, listening to the silence, realizing that for the first time in 5 years, the ghost of Sarah was not standing in the corner of the room. The incident happened 2 days later. A freelance hauler had dragged a heavily damaged transport skiff into the bay. The pilot was a nervous Rhodian who paid in cash and asked no questions. The skiff had taken a micrometeoroid impact to the port maneuvering thruster, severing the primary data coupling. It was a nasty job. The coupling was buried deep inside the engine housing, accessible only by reaching through a tangle of jagged, superheated cooling fins. "I cannot reach it," Cale grunted, his arm buried up to the elbow in the machinery. "My hands are too big. I need the micro-manipulator, but the angle is wrong." "Let me," Aya said. She was standing beside him, wearing a pair of Cale's spare coveralls that she had rolled up at the sleeves and legs. "It is dangerous. Aya, the capacitors are still holding a residual charge." "I will be fast," she said. Before he could stop her, she slid her slender arm into the narrow gap in the housing. Cale watched, tense, ready to yank her back if the system sparked. "I feel the break," Aya said, her face pressed against the cool metal of the hull. "It is deep. The connection is frayed." "Don't touch the bare wires," Cale warned. "Just guide the clamp." "The clamp is too clumsy," she murmured. "I can fix it." "Aya, use the tool." She didn't listen. Cale saw her body stiffen. Suddenly, the dark interior of the engine housing lit up with a brilliant, violet light. It wasn't the spark of a short circuit. It was a fluid, pulsing glow. Cale grabbed a flashlight and shone it into the gap. What he saw stopped his breath. Aya's hand was not holding the wires. Her hand was the wires. Her skin had dissolved at the fingertips, unraveling into thousands of microscopic silver filaments. These filaments, nanotech, Cale realized with a jolt of horror, were swarming over the damaged data coupling. They moved like living mercury, knitting the copper and fiber optics back together, fusing the metal at a molecular level. The skiff's engines shuddered. The lights on the dashboard flickered from red to green. "Aya!" Kyle shouted. He grabbed her shoulder and pulled. She came away with a wet, tearing sound. She stumbled back, clutching her hand to her chest. Kyle looked at her fingers. For a split second, they were a blur of shifting silver liquid, and then, instantly, they solidified back into pale, human-looking skin. She looked up at him, terror wide in her eyes. She was shaking violently. I didn't mean to," she stammered. It happened." Kale stared at her. He looked at the skiff, which was now humming with a perfectly tuned engine note. He looked back at the girl. "That wasn't just repairing," Kale said, his voice low and dangerous. "That was integration. You are not just a mechanic. Aya, what are you?" She backed away until she hit the tool bench. "Don't look at me like that. We need to go," Kale said abruptly. He wasn't angry at her. He was terrified for her. If anyone else had seen that, if the Rhodian pilot had seen that, she would be dissected within the hour. "Where?" she asked, trembling. "Out," Kale said. "Away from people, away from cameras. Get in the rover, now." He didn't give her time to argue. He shoved her into the passenger seat of his battered ground rover, threw a tarp over the back to hide their supplies, and gunned the engine. They roared out of the garage, leaving the city behind, heading for the deep rust, the endless expanse of oxidized desert that covered most of Iridian 9. He drove for an hour in silence, putting 50 miles of jagged rock and sand between them and the spaceport. When the city lights were just a smudge on the horizon, he killed the engine. The silence of the desert was absolute. Overhead, the stars were cold and hard, indifferent to the tiny drama playing out on the surface. Kale turned in his seat to face her. The interior lights of the rover were dim. "Talk," Kale commanded. "And this time, the truth. No more, 'I don't know.'" That wasn't biology back there. That was military-grade nanotech, the kind that gets planets embargoed. Aya hugged her knees, staring out at the dark sands. She looked very young and very old all at once. "I am not a girl," she whispered. "I am a vessel." "A vessel for what?" "For the Empire." She turned to him and her eyes were glowing faintly in the dark. "My name is not just Aya. It is Illyra Valvirella. I am the last daughter of the Virellan throne." Kale felt the blood drain from his face. The Virellan Empire. They were a myth, a cautionary tale. A civilization that had advanced so far in biodigital fusion that they had terrified the rest of the galaxy into a unified crusade to destroy them 50 years ago. "The Virellans are dead," Kale said. "The Coalition glassed your homeworlds. They destroyed the planets," Aya said, her voice hollow. "But they could not destroy the data. My father, he knew the end was coming. He took the sum total of our military protocols, the command codes for the ghost fleets, the weapon schematics, the strategic algorithms, and he encoded them into a biological substrate." She held up her hand. The skin shimmered, momentarily revealing the silver mesh beneath. "Me," she said. "He put it all inside me. I was an infant. They froze me. They hid me. But the facility found me." "So you're a walking library," Kale said, trying to process the scale of it. "I am a key," she corrected. "If I touch a Virellan warship, it obeys me. If I touch a planetary defense grid, I can rewrite it. The nanotech inside me, it wants to connect, it wants to conquer. It is hard to keep it quiet. When I fixed the ship, it was like breathing after holding my breath for years." She looked at Kale, tears streaking her dusty face. I am a weapon, Kale. Designed to control interstellar fleets, designed to burn worlds. That is why they hunt me, not for money, for the apocalypse. Kale stared at her. He should be running. He should be pushing her out of the rover and driving away as fast as his fusion cell could carry him. She was a bomb. She was the most dangerous thing in the universe. But all he saw was a scared girl who liked sandwiches and hummed to broken machines. Okay, Kyle said. He let out a long breath. Okay. You are not running, Aya said, confused. I'm thinking about it, Kyle admitted. But I'm not very smart. So, you're a princess and a doomsday device. That explains the attitude. A weak smile flickered on her lips, then vanished. Kyle reached into his pocket and pulled out his data pad. He checked the local bounty boards, just to see how bad it was. His stomach dropped. The screen was flashing red. A priority alert had been pushed to every bounty hunter, mercenary, and law enforcement officer in the sector. Wanted fugitive designation, subject 0, Virilan origin, extreme hazard, reward increased to 20 million credits, alive or dead. There was a grainy image attached. It was from a security camera. It showed a figure in gray robes entering a garage. His garage. Damn it, Kale hissed. What? Aya leaned over. She saw the image. She saw the number. 20 million. She recoiled as if struck. They know. They know I am with you. Karn, Kale spat. That cybernetic rat, he must have planted a sensor when he came by. Or he's been watching the shop. You are in danger, Aya said, her voice rising in panic. If they find you with me, they will kill you. They will burn everything. We go back, Kyle said, starting the engine. We pack what we can. We leave. No, Aya shouted, and she lunged for the door handle. I will not let you die for me. She threw the door open and scrambled out into the sand. Aya, Kyle yelled. He killed the engine and vaulted out after her. She was fast, powered by adrenaline and the alien tech in her blood. She sprinted toward the dunes, her robes flapping in the night wind. Kale chased her, his boots sinking into the soft sand. He was older, heavier, but desperation gave him speed. He caught her at the crest of a dune. He tackled her, sending them both tumbling down the other side in a cloud of dust. They came to a stop at the bottom. Aya fought him, thrashing wildly. Let me go! She screamed, her voice distorting, sounding almost synthesized. I am dead, Kyle! I am dead! Stop it! Kale pinned her wrist to the sand. He was breathing hard, his face inches from hers. Stop! She went still, heaving for air. Her eyes were glowing bright violet now. The nanotech surging with her emotion, her skin felt hot to the touch. Why? She sobbed. Why won't you let me leave? I am a monster. I am a weapon. Because I don't care, Kale shouted back. I don't care what's in your blood. I care that you fixed my toaster. I care that you hum when you work. I care that you're the only thing that's made me feel like a human being in 5 damn years. The silence that followed was deafening. The wind whistled over the dunes. Aya stared up at him, her silver eyes wide, searching his face for any sign of deception. She found none. Do you want to live? She whispered. I didn't, Kyle said, his voice dropping to a rough murmur. Not until you showed up asking for a sandwich. The space between them seemed to vanish. The adrenaline, the fear, the rage, it all coalesced into something else, something magnetic. Kale didn't think. He leaned down. Aya surged up. Their lips met in a collision that was less like a kiss and more like a desperate impact. It was clumsy, fierce, and electric. Kyle tasted salt and dust on her skin. He felt a static charge zap his lips, a low-level current running through her. But he didn't pull away. He deepened the kiss, his hands tangling in her silver hair. For a moment, The galaxy didn't exist. The bounty didn't exist. There was only the heat of her body and the desperate need to hold on to something real. Then, Aya gasped and pulled back. She scrambled away from him, crab-walking backward across the sand, her hand covering her mouth. "No," she whispered. "No, I can't. If I lose control, if I feel too much, the tech, it could hurt you. It could kill you." "Aya." Kyle reached for her. "I am not a woman, Kale," she cried, her voice cracking. "I am a weapon. I am a fleet killer." Kale stayed on his knees in the sand. He looked at her, silhouetted against the starlight, terrifying and beautiful. "You're the first person I've wanted to live for in a long time," Kale said quietly. "If that kills me, then it's a better death than the one I was waiting for." Aya lowered her hand. The glow in her eyes softened, shifting from violent violet to a gentle, pulsing pink. She looked at him with a longing that broke his heart. "We have to go," she said, her voice trembling. "They are coming." Kyle nodded. He stood up and offered her his hand. She hesitated, then took it. She was careful, keeping her grip loose, afraid of her own strength. "Not back to the shop," Aya said. "It is a trap now." "We have to go back," Kale said grimly. "We need a ship." "We cannot use the spaceport," Aya argued. "They will have locked down the docking clamps." "We're not using the spaceport," Kale said. A grim smile touched his lips. "I told you I have a haunted past. Aya, I didn't tell you I used to run blockades for the resistance before the war." He pulled her toward the rover. "There is a reason my shop has a concrete floor 3 feet thick," Kale said. "And there is a reason I never let anyone inspect the foundation." They drove back to the city in silence, but it was a different kind of silence now. It was the silence of two people who had stepped off the edge of a cliff together and were waiting to see if they would fly or crash. When they reached the alley behind the shop, Kale didn't go to the door. He went to a rusted electrical junction box on the exterior wall. He keyed in a sequence that he hadn't used in 8 years. The ground beneath the garage shuddered. Dust fell from the brickwork. "What is that?" Aya asked, looking at the vibrating earth. Inside the garage, the concrete floor was splitting open. Hydraulic rams, groaning from years of disuse, pushed the heavy slabs apart. Rising from the darkness of the sub-basement was a ship. It wasn't pretty. It was a modified strike courier, painted matte black, with oversized engines and a hull scarred by plasma fire. It looked like a predatory bird that had been buried in a grave. "Meet the Iron Sparrow," Kale said, patting the landing strut. "She's ugly, she leaks radiation, and she's the fastest thing in this sector." Aya looked at the ship, then at Kyle. "You were a smuggler." "I was a lot of things," Kyle said. He opened the airlock. "Right now, I'm just a guy trying to get a girl off a rock. Get in." As they climbed the ramp, the sensors in the cockpit began to scream. "Proximity alert," Kyle shouted, jumping into the pilot's seat. "They're here." On the external monitors, 3 heavily armed gunships were descending from the smog, their searchlights sweeping the alley. "Hang on!" Kyle punched the ignition sequence. The Iron Sparrow roared to life, its engines spitting blue fire. It hadn't flown in a decade, but it woke up with a vengeance, shaking off the dust of Iridian 9. Kale slammed the throttle forward. The ship surged upward, shattering the remains of the garage roof, blasting through the debris and rocketing toward the sky. The chase was on. The Iron Sparrow screamed as it tore through the upper atmosphere of Iridian 9. The ship was a relic, a bucket of bolts held together by spit and prayers. But its engines were military-grade contraband from a war that had ended a decade ago. The G-force pinned Kale to the pilot's seat. His teeth gritted so hard his jaw ached. "Shields are down to 40%, Kale shouted over the roar of the thrusters. Beside him, Aya was curled into a ball in the co-pilot's chair. Her hands were clamped over her ears, and her eyes were squeezed shut. She was glowing again, not the soft, rhythmic pulse of her sleep, but a jagged, violent stroboscope of blinding violet light. "They are locking on," Aya gasped. She didn't look at the sensors. She felt it. The nanotech in her blood was singing in harmony with the targeting computers of the ships chasing them. 3 missiles, heat seekers. "I see them," Kale lied. He didn't see them. The rear sensors were fried. He yanked the yoke hard to the left, sending the Iron Sparrow into a sickening corkscrew maneuver. Explosions blossomed in the smog behind them, rocking the ship. Shrapnel clattered against the hull like hail. The bounty hunter gunships were faster, newer, and relentless. They weren't trying to capture the ship. They were trying to disable it, uncaring if the occupants survived the crash. "Kyle!" Aya screamed. "They are going to fire the EMP!" "I know!" Kyle snapped, sweat stinging his eyes. "I can't outrun an electromagnetic pulse in this atmosphere." "I can stop them," Aya whispered. Kale glanced at her. "Don't you dare! You almost melted your hand fixing a toaster, and this is a fleet of gunships." "They will kill you!" Aya unbuckled her harness. Before Kale could stop her, she slammed her palms against the dashboard. It wasn't a hacking attempt. It was a scream, translated into binary code. Kyle watched in horror as the veins in Aya's arms turned black, then brilliant white. The cockpit lights blew out. The display screens shattered. A shockwave of pure, unadulterated energy erupted from her body, passed through the hull of the Iron Sparrow, and expanded outward in a terrifying sphere of silence. It hit the pursuing gunships like a physical hammer. On the rear monitor, which miraculously flickered back to life for a second, Kale saw the 3 pursuit vessels simply drop. Their engines died instantly. Their lights vanished. They fell out of the sky like stones plummeting back toward the spaceport below. But the wave didn't stop there. It kept going. Below them, the sprawling lights of the Iridian 9 spaceport, a city of 2 million souls, winked out. The docking clamps released. The neon signs died, and the traffic control towers went dark. Half the planet's hemisphere seemed to plunge into sudden, medieval night. "Holy hell," Kyle breathed. Aya slumped forward, unconscious. Kyle didn't have time to check on her. He punched the hyperdrive coordinates for the ghost sector. The nav computer whined, calculated, and then the stars stretched into infinite lines of light. They vanished from normal space, leaving a blacked-out world in their wake. The silence of hyperspace was unnerving. Usually, Kale found it peaceful, a void where his memories couldn't find him. Now, it felt heavy, suffocating. It had been 2 days since the escape. The Iron Sparrow was limping. The hyperdrive was running hot, and the life support scrubbers were making a rattling sound that set Kale's teeth on edge. Aya had retreated to the small crew cabin in the back. She refused to come out. When Kale brought her trays of protein mash and water, she wouldn't look at him. She sat on the bunk, staring at her hands, wrapped in a blanket as if she were freezing. Kale spent his time in the engine room, welding a fracture in the coolant line. He was exhausted. His hands were covered in burns and grease, but he kept working. If he stopped working, he would have to think about the fact that he was now harboring a living weapon capable of disabling a planetary grid with a thought. He finished the weld and wiped his brow. He couldn't leave her alone there forever. He walked to the cabin door and keyed it open. Aya didn't look up. The room was dark, illuminated only by the faint blue strip lighting on the floor. "You have to eat," Kyle said gently, setting the tray down on the small desk. "I am dangerous," Aya said. Her voice was flat, hollow. "We're all dangerous. Aya, I once beat a man half to death with a wrench because he insulted my ship. Danger is relative." "I turned off the city," she whispered. She looked up, and her eyes were red-rimmed. The silver irises looked dull. "I felt them. Kyle. All the ships, all the computers, and I felt their little mechanical hearts beating, and I stopped them. It was easy. It felt good." She shuddered, wrapping her arms around herself. "That is what terrified me. It felt good to be powerful." Cale sat on the edge of the bunk. He didn't reach out to touch her, sensing she needed space. "That's the design talking, not you." "Is there a difference?" she asked. "I was made in a test tube, Cale. My first memory is not a mother's face. It is a face mask, a scientist looking down at me, checking my vitals." She took a shaky breath. "I was 12 when they started the integration. They cut me open. They didn't use anesthesia because they needed to see how the nanites responded to pain stimuli. They replaced my bone marrow with synthesized metal. They wove filaments into my nervous system." Kyle felt sick. He clenched his fists, his nails digging into his palms. He wanted to kill everyone involved. He wanted to burn that facility to the ground. "They told me I was special," Aya continued, her voice distant. "They said I was the key to peace. Because if the Empire controlled everything, every ship, every grid, every weapon, then no one could fight. But they didn't want peace. They wanted silence. And I was the mute button." She looked at Cale. "I ran away because I heard them talking about liquidation. The war was over. The Empire was gone. I was an expensive loose end. So I ran. And then you gave me a sandwich." A ghost of a smile touched her lips, but it didn't reach her eyes. "You're not a loose end," Kyle said fiercely. "And you're not a button. You're Aya. You fix things. You hum weird songs." "I am a monster," she corrected. "No," Cale said. He reached out then, taking her hand. She flinched, but he held on. "Monsters enjoy the pain. You're just a person who has been given a heavy load to carry, and I'm going to help you put it down." She looked at him, her gaze searching his face for the lie. She didn't find one. She squeezed his hand, her grip desperate. "How?" she asked. "There's a contact on Chixal," Cale said. "An old slicer I used to run with. He knows code better than anyone. If there's a way to extract the programming without killing you, he'll know. And if he can't, then we find someone else," Cale said stubbornly. "We keep going." The universe, however, had a sense of humor, and it was usually cruel. They were passing through the Cygnus Nebula, a swirling graveyard of ionized gas and magnetic storms, when the Iron Sparrow hit a pocket of gravimetric shear. The ship lurched violently, as if a giant hand had slapped it sideways. Alarms screamed. Gravity failed, then slammed back on at double strength, pinning them to the floor. "Stabilizer core failure," Cale yelled, crawling toward the engine room. "The magnetic containment is failing." If the core breached, the antimatter fuel would touch the hull, and they would be vaporized instantly. "Cale, wait!" Aya shouted, floating behind him as gravity fluctuated again. Cale pulled himself into the engine room. It was a nightmare. Steam hissed from ruptured pipes. The core, a spinning sphere of blue fire, was wobbling wildly in its magnetic housing. Arcs of lightning lashed out, scorching the walls. "I have to manually reset the dampers," Cale roared over the noise. He lunged for the manual override lever. He grabbed it and pulled it. A bolt of blue electricity arced from the core and struck him in the chest. Cale was thrown backward. He hit the bulkhead with a sickening crunch. His vision went white. He couldn't breathe. His heart was stuttering, his muscles locked in a tetanic spasm. He lay on the deck, paralyzed, watching the core spin faster and faster. The containment field was collapsing. He was going to die. After surviving the war, after surviving poverty, he was going to die because of a faulty gasket. Then, a shadow fell over him. Aya. She stood before the raging core. Her robes whipped around her in the magnetic wind. She didn't look scared. She looked furious. "No," she said. She reached out with both hands. She didn't try to touch the lever. She reached directly into the plasma fire of the core. Kyle tried to shout, to tell her to stop, but only a wheezing sound came out. Aya screamed. It was a sound of pure agony. Her hands didn't melt, the nanotech wouldn't allow it, but the flesh burned. The skin blackened and peeled away, revealing the shining silver musculature beneath. The nanites swarmed out of her arms, a silver mist that engulfed the spinning core. They attacked the energy, fighting it, wrestling the chaotic physics back into submission. The light in the room shifted from blinding white to a deep, controlled violet. The screaming of the engine lowered in pitch, the wobble smoothed out, with one final guttural cry. Aya slammed the magnetic field back into place with her mind. The core hummed, steady, safe. Aya collapsed. Kyle's paralysis broke. He scrambled over to her, ignoring the pain in his own ribs. "Aya, Aya!" She was unconscious. Her hands were smoking ruins of charred flesh and silver wire. The burns extended up her forearms, angry red lines tracking her veins. He scooped her up. She was terrifyingly light. He carried her to the med bay, his heart breaking with every step. He spent 6 hours treating her. He cut away the dead tissue. He applied regenerative gel. He wrapped her arms in synth flesh bandages. When she finally woke up, the ship was quiet again. They were out of the nebula. Kale was sitting in a chair next to the biobed, his head in his hands. When he heard her stir, he looked up. He looked 10 years older than he had that morning. "You idiot," Kale rasped. His eyes were wet. "You stupid, brave idiot. You could have burned your nervous system out." Aya looked at her bandaged arms. She tried to move her fingers and winced. "The ship, is it safe?" "The ship is fine," Kyle said, his voice cracking. "I don't care about the ship. I care about you." He stood up and paced the small room, agitated. "I can't protect you if you keep throwing yourself into the fire. Aya, I'm supposed to be the one saving you." "Why?" Aya asked softly. Kale stopped pacing. He looked at her. "Because that's the job. That's the deal." "No," she said. She pushed herself up into a sitting position, wincing. "That is not the deal. I am not a package you are delivering, Kale. I am your partner." She swung her legs off the bed. She stood up, swaying slightly. She walked over to him. She was shorter than him, but at that moment, she felt tall. "I saved you," she said, "because I wanted to. Not because of my programming. Because I could not stand the thought of a universe without you in it." Kale stared at her. The anger drained out of him, leaving only a raw, aching tenderness. "My arms hurt," she whispered. Kale let out a shaky breath. He stepped forward and wrapped his arms around her, careful not to touch her burns. He held her tight, burying his face in her silver hair. She smelled of ozone and antiseptic and something sweet, like vanilla. "I'm sorry," he murmured into her hair. "I'm so sorry." "Stay with me," she said against his chest. "Even if I am dangerous, even if I burn, stay." "I'm not going anywhere," Kale promised. "I'm stuck to you like rust, princess." Chixal was the armpit of the galaxy. It was a moon that had been hollowed out by mining corporations centuries ago and then abandoned to the cartels. Now, it was a hive of black markets, spice dens, and unauthorized chop shops. The air was so thick with smog you could chew it, and the neon signs advertising pleasures of the flesh were the only stars in the sky. Cale docked the Iron Sparrow in a private hangar run by a connection he trusted, a Twi'lek named Jaro who owed him a life debt. "Keep her hidden, Jaro," Cale said, handing the alien a credit chip. "If anyone asks, this bay is empty." "Empty as my mother's heart," Jaro grunted, pocketing the chip. "But be careful, Kyle. The shadows are long here." They needed a place to rest before the meeting with the code slicer the next morning. The Iron Sparrow was too conspicuous to stay on, and the hangar had no life support. They checked into a hotel called the Void. It was a towering stack of rusted shipping containers welded together. The lobby smelled of stale beer and disinfectant. The clerk, a droid with half its face missing, gave them a key card to a room on the 42nd floor without asking for ID. The room was small. A single viewport looked out over the smog-choked city. There was a narrow bed, a flickering holovision unit, and a shower that dripped incessantly. It was the most luxurious place Aya had ever seen. She went to the window and stared at the neon lights reflecting off the acid rain. Kyle sat on the edge of the bed, checking his blaster. He was tense. Every shadow looked like a bounty hunter. "It is beautiful," Aya said. "It's a cesspool," Cale corrected, not looking up. "It is alive," she said. "Chaotic, messy, free." She turned from the window. She watched Cale cleaning his weapon. The harsh light of the room softened the lines of his face, highlighting the gray in his stubble. "Cale," she said. He looked up. "Yeah?" "Put the gun away." He hesitated, then clicked the safety on and set it on the nightstand. "What's wrong? Are you in pain?" "No," she said. She walked toward him. Her movements were deliberate. She stopped a foot away from him. "I want to try something," she said. Her voice was trembling, but her eyes were steady. "Okay," Kyle said slowly. "What is it, another song?" "No." She reached out with her bandaged hands and touched his face. Her fingertips peeking out from the gauze and were cool. She traced the line of his jaw, the scar over his eyebrow. "In the facility," she said softly. "They monitored my heart rate, my hormones, my brain waves. They controlled everything. When I slept, when I ate. They even suppressed my desires. They said a weapon does not need to feel wanted." She stepped closer until her knees touched him. "But the suppressors are gone. And I want to." Kyle's breath hitched. He looked at her, really looked at her. She wasn't a child anymore. The last few days had stripped away the innocence, leaving behind a woman who was discovering her own edges. "Aya," Cale warned, his voice gravelly. "You don't have to do this. You don't owe me anything." "This is not a debt," she said fiercely. "This is a choice. My choice." She leaned down and kissed him. It wasn't like the kiss in the desert. That had been panic and adrenaline. This was slow, deliberate. It tasted of hesitation and overwhelming curiosity. Kyle sat frozen for a moment, terrified he might break her. But then she made a small sound against his mouth, a soft, hungry, whimpering sound, and his resolve shattered. He reached up and pulled her closer. She straddled his lap, her heavy robes bunching up. Kyle's hands found her waist, feeling the warmth of her skin through the rough fabric. It was awkward at first. She didn't know the mechanics of it, only the instinct. But she was a fast learner. She explored him with the same intensity she used to fix machines, mapping the responses of his body. When Cale pulled her robe off, revealing her pale, scarred body marked with the silver ports of her torture, he hesitated. "I am ugly," she whispered, trying to cover herself. You are a miracle, Kale rasped. He kissed the metal port at the base of her throat. He kissed the silver lines on her ribs. He worshipped the scars that she hated. The act itself was a revelation. It was desperate and tender, a collision of two lonely souls finding harbor in the dark. For Aya, it was an explosion of sensory input that her nanotech tried to analyze but couldn't. There was no algorithm for the way his skin felt against hers. There was no code for the way her breath caught when he moved inside her. It was messy. It was human. It was the furthest thing from a weapon she had ever been. Afterward, they lay tangled in the sheets, the room quiet save for the dripping shower. Aya rested her head on Kale's chest, listening to his heartbeat. It was slow now, steady. She traced circles on his skin with her bandaged hand. I don't want to be anyone's weapon again, she whispered into the darkness. I don't want to be a key, or a vessel, or a princess. Kyle tightened his arm around her. He kissed the top of her head. Then don't, he said simply. Just be mine. Yours. She tested the word. I like that. It sounds safe. Sleep, Kale murmured. I've got the watch. Trillions of miles away, on a pristine orbital station that smelled of lavender and sterile air, a notification chimed on a data pad. Director Valeric picked it up. She was a woman of sharp angles and ice-blue eyes wearing a uniform that was perfectly pressed. She sipped a cup of tea as she scrolled through the report. Energy signature detected. Sector 7G. Iridian system. Magnitude. Class 5. Planetary disruption. She paused. She swiped to the next page. It was a grainy image from a traffic satellite, taken milliseconds before the blackout. It showed a small, battered ship fleeing the atmosphere, and inside the cockpit, glowing like a supernova, was a silhouette she knew better than her own children. Valeric set the teacup down. It made a delicate clink against the saucer. Subject 0, she said softly. You clever little girl. She tapped a button on her desk. Get me the huntsman, she ordered the voice that answered. And tell him to bring the heavy containment unit. We have a location. She looked at the image of the Iron Sparrow one last time. Playtime is over. Aya. The hunt had begun again. This time, they wouldn't send thugs. They would send war. The Grand Bazaar of Chigzal was less a market and more a festering wound in the side of the moon's industrial sector, bleeding neon light and desperate commerce into the smog. It was a labyrinth of canvas stalls, rusted shipping containers, and holographic advertisements that flickered with seizures of color. The air smelled of frying oil, unwashed bodies, and the sharp, chemical tang of illicit spice. Kyle moved through the crowd with his shoulders hunched, his hand resting casually near the blaster holstered beneath his jacket. He wore a hood pulled low, scanning every face, every shadow. Beside him, Aya was indistinguishable from the hundreds of other refugees and drifters. She wore a heavy scavenger's cloak, her face hidden behind a rebreather mask that concealed her alien features and the distinctive silver of her eyes. They were looking for a man named Voron. According to Jaro, Voron was a ghost, a former archivist for the Virilan Empire who had managed to vanish before the purges began. Keep your head down, Kyle murmured, his voice barely audible over the cacophony of a nearby stall selling bootleg engine parts. And do not touch anything. I mean it, Aya. If you fix a blender by accident, we are dead. Aya nodded, her gloved hands clenched tight in the fabric of her cloak. She was vibrating with tension. The sheer volume of life here, the noise, the heat, the chaotic biological signals was overwhelming her senses. She could feel the hum of 1,000 failing power cells and the static of cheap cybernetics. They found Vorin in the back of a noodle shop that smelled of sulfur and ginger. He was a small, shriveled man with skin the color of old parchment and shaking hands that clutched a cup of tea as if it were a lifeline. Kale slid into the booth opposite him. Aya sat next to Kale, making herself small. "You are the mechanic," Vorin said. His voice was a dry rasp. He did not look at Kyle. He looked at the table. "I am," Kyle said. "Yarrow said you have information about an override key." Vorin flinched. He looked around the shop, his eyes wide and watery. "Quiet. The walls have ears. The flies have cameras. We have credits," Kale said, sliding a heavy credit chip across the greasy table. "Enough to get you off this rock. Enough to buy a new identity in the Outer Rim." Vorin stared at the chip. Hunger warred with fear in his face. He reached out, his fingers trembling, and pulled the chip closer. "The Empire did not die," Vorin whispered. "It just went to sleep. The weapons, the ships. They are waiting for the signal." He looked at Aya then. Despite the mask, despite the cloak, he seemed to know. "You brought the signal with you," Vorin accused, his voice rising in panic. "She is the catalyst. She is a passenger," Kyle said sharply. "Where is the vault? Vorin?" Vorin fumbled in his ragged tunic. He pulled out a data spike, an ancient crystalline drive that glowed with a dull inner light. "The coordinates," Vorin hissed. "They are for a dreadnought, the Ethel Guard. It was the flagship of the stealth fleet. It never launched. It is drifting in the ghost sector. The override protocol is in the captain's vault. It can wipe the nanotech code. It can set her free." Kale reached for the drive. "Thank you." "It is a trap," Vorin said, clutching Kale's wrist with surprising strength. "The ship is dead, but the ghosts are not. They will—" The sentence ended in a wet thud. A small red hole appeared in the center of Vorin's forehead. Time seemed to suspend. Kyle saw the mist of blood spray across the table. He saw the light fade from the old man's eyes. Then, the sound of the shot registered, a cracked whip of noise that cut through the bazaar's din. "Down!" Kyle roared. He grabbed Aya and shoved her under the table just as the booth disintegrated in a hail of plasma fire. The noodle shop erupted into chaos. Patrons screamed and trampled each other. Kale flipped the heavy table on its side, using it as a shield. He peeked over the edge. 3 figures were pushing through the crowd. They were huge, clad in matte black armor that hissed with hydraulic pistons. Their faces were gone, replaced by sensor arrays and targeting optics. "Reapers," Kale cursed. "Cybernetic bounty hunters. They don't take prisoners." He grabbed the data spike from Vorin's cooling hand and shoved it into his pocket. "We have to move. Now!" He fired 2 shots blindly over the table, shattering a steam pipe overhead. A cloud of scalding white vapor filled the room. "Go!" Kyle dragged Aya toward the kitchen. They scrambled over pots and pans, slipping on spilled grease. They burst out the back door into a narrow, garbage-strewn alley. "There!" Kyle pointed to a rusted sewer grate. He grabbed the grate and heaved. It was heavy, rusted shut, but adrenaline gave him the strength to tear it free. He shoved Aya into the dark hole and jumped in after her, pulling the grate back into place just as the alley filled with laser fire. They fell 10 feet, splashing into knee-deep sludge that smelled of chemical waste and rot. "Run!" Kyle commanded. They sprinted through the tunnels. The only light came from the flashlight on Kale's blaster. The sewer was a maze of crumbling brick and dripping pipes. Behind them, they heard the heavy metallic clang of the Reapers dropping into the tunnel. "They are tracking my heat signature," Aya gasped, struggling to keep up. Her robes were heavy with muck. "They are tracking the isotope decay in my blood." "Then we go deeper," Kyle said. "Mask the signal." They turned a corner and skidded to a halt. The tunnel ended. A massive collapse had sealed the passage. Rubble was piled to the ceiling. They were trapped. Behind them. The heavy thudding of footsteps grew louder. The darkness at the end of the corridor lit up with the red glow of targeting lasers. "Get behind me," Kale said. He pushed Aya behind him and raised his blaster. He knew it was useless. His heavy pistol might dent their armor, but it wouldn't stop 3 Reapers. The first hunter emerged from the shadows, and it was 7 feet tall, a walking tank of plasteel and hate. It raised a rotary cannon. "Target acquired," a synthesized voice boomed. "Subject 0. Surrender or be incapacitated." "Go to hell," Kale spat. He fired. The bolt pinged harmlessly off the Reaper's chest plate. The Reaper's cannon spun up. A high-pitched whine filled the tunnel. Kyle braced himself to die. He hoped his body would shield her enough. He hoped. "No!" The scream came from behind him. It wasn't a human sound. It was a harmonic resonance that shattered the air. Aya shoved past him. She threw her hands out, palms facing the hunters. Kale expected the white blast of energy that had disabled the spaceport. He expected an explosion. Instead, silence fell. A dome of shimmering, translucent violet light expanded from Aya's hands. It moved slowly like a soap bubble, drifting down the corridor. The Reapers opened fire. The plasma bolts hit the bubble and simply vanished. They didn't deflect. They didn't explode. They ceased to exist. The bubble kept moving. It washed over the first Reaper. There was no sound, no crunch of metal. As the violet light passed through the massive cyborg, the machine simply unraveled. Armor, flesh, circuitry, and bone dissolved into fine gray dust. The Reaper didn't fall. It just drifted apart, turning into a cloud of atoms that settled on the sewer water. The second and third Reapers tried to backpedal, but the bubble was too fast. It expanded, engulfing them. In a second, they were gone. The bubble hit the walls. The bricks turned to dust. The sludge turned to clear water. Then, with a soft pop, the field vanished. The tunnel was silent, where 3 unstoppable killing machines had stood. There was nothing but 3 piles of gray powder floating in the muck. Aya stood frozen, her hands still raised. She stared at the empty space. She was shaking so hard her teeth rattled. "Aya," Kyle whispered. He was terrified. He had seen weapons of war, but he had never seen anything like that. That was the power of a god. She turned to him. She had ripped her mask off. Her face was pale, her silver eyes wide with horror. I unmade them," she stammered. "I didn't just kill them. I erased them. I pulled their atoms apart." She looked at her hands. "I am dead. I am just dead." She sank to her knees in the filth, sobbing. "Get away from me, Kale, please, before I do it to you." Kale didn't run. He holstered his blaster. He walked through the water, closing the distance between them. "Don't!" she screamed, scrabbling backward. "I can't control it. It wanted to feed. It wanted to wipe the slate clean." Kyle ignored her. He reached down and grabbed her shoulders, hauling her up. She fought him, trying to push him away, terrified that her touch would turn him to dust. "Look at me," Kale shouted, shaking her. "Aya, look at me." She squeezed her eyes shut. "If I lose myself, will you kill me? Promise me, Kale. If I turn into that thing, promise you will put a bolt in my head." "No," Kale said. "Promise me," she shrieked. "No." Kale pulled her against his chest, wrapping his arms around her tightly, pinning her arms to her sides so she couldn't push him away. He held her against his heartbeat. "I will not kill you." "I am a monster," she sobbed into his jacket. "I'll remind you who you are. Kale said, his voice rough with emotion. You are the girl who fixes toasters. You are the girl who likes sandwiches. You are Aya. And you just saved our lives. He held her until the shaking stopped, standing in the dark, stinking sewer, whispering her name over and over until the violet glow faded from her skin and she was just a frightened girl again. Getting back to the Iron Sparrow was a blur of shadows and evasion. They slipped past the confused blockade, using the chaos of the assassination to their advantage. When the airlock finally hissed shut behind them, the relief was physical. They were in hyperspace 10 minutes later. The journey to the ghost sector would take 3 days. 3 days of silence, 3 days of waiting. Kyle spent the first day decoding the data spike Vorin had given them. It was a heavy encryption, Virelin military cipher. But Aya helped him. She sat beside him at the console, not touching the keys, just whispering the logic patterns to him. She was subdued, quiet, flinching at loud noises again. By the second evening, they had it. The Ethelgard, Kyle said, looking at the holographic display. It's drifting in the Lagrange point of a dead binary star system. The vault is on the bridge. The override key is a physical drive. We have to plug it into you, and it will rewrite the command hierarchy of your nanites. It will give you root access to your own body. Will it make me normal? Aya asked. It will make you free, Kale said. You'll still be you, but the weapon protocols will be gone. No more fleets, no more disintegration fields. Aya looked at the screen. Free. Kale stood up. The mood in the ship was too heavy. It felt like a funeral. He needed to break the tension. He needed to see her smile. Come here, he said. Aya looked up. Where? Here, the cargo bay. It's the only place with enough room. He led her down to the hold. It was empty, save for a few spare crates. Kyle went to the wall panel and tapped a few buttons. A soft, rhythmic beat began to play over the ship's intercom. Old Earth jazz, slow and smoky. What is this? Aya asked. Music, Kale said. Real music. Not that electronic noise they play on Chixal. He walked over to her and held out his hand. Dance with me. Aya stared at his hand. I do not know the protocols for dancing. There are no protocols, Kyle smiled. That's the point. You just feel it. He took her hand and pulled her in. He placed her other hand on his shoulder and rested his hand on her waist. Left foot, right foot, Kyle murmured. Just follow me. They moved awkwardly at first. Aya was stiff, calculating the vectors of movement, trying to predict his steps. But Kale kept it simple. He swayed, guiding her. Stop thinking, he whispered. Close your eyes. She did, and slowly the stiffness left her. She let him lead. The smell of the sewer was gone, scrubbed away by the sonic shower. She smelled of soap and something uniquely her, like ozone and vanilla. They spun slowly in the dim light of the cargo bay. My people, Aya said softly, her eyes still closed. We did not dance, we marched. Movement was for efficiency. Your people were boring, Kale said. Aya laughed. It was a rusty, small sound, but it was real. She stopped moving and she opened her eyes. They were shimmering. I want to show you something, she said. She pulled away gently. She raised her hands, palms up. Don't be scared, she said. This is not a weapon. Small motes of light began to drift from her skin. They weren't violent this time. They were soft gold, white, and blue. They floated up, filling the dark cargo bay. Kale watched in awe. The lights arranged themselves. They formed shapes, spirals, clusters. It is the galaxy, Kale breathed. It is the galaxy before the war, Aya corrected. This is the map my father put in my head. Look, she pointed. The lights swirled. Kyle saw star systems he recognized, but they were brighter, fuller. He saw nebulas that had been burned away decades ago. He saw the Virellan homeworlds, intact and green. It was a map made of light and memory suspended in the air around them. They were floating in a ghost galaxy. It is beautiful, Kyle said. It is gone, Aya said. But I remember it. She turned to him. The stars swirled around her, framing her face in light. I do not want to be a memory, Kyle, she whispered. I want to be here now. She stepped into him, breaking the illusion. The stars vanished, fading into sparks that drifted to the floor. She kissed him. This time, there was no hesitation. There was no awkwardness. She kissed him fiercely, claiming confidence. She kissed him like a woman who knew exactly what she wanted. Kyle lifted her up, wrapping her legs around his waist. She buried her hands in his hair. He carried her out of the cargo bay, down the hall to his quarters. The door slid shut, locking out the universe. They made love with a desperate, joyous intensity. It wasn't somber like the hotel room. There was laughter this time, when Kale banged his elbow on the bulkhead, when Aya's hair tickled his nose. There was exploration. There was the realization that two broken things could fit together to make something whole. Later, lying in the tangle of blankets, the ship humming quietly around them, Kale ran his hand down the curve of her spine. You are terrified of what is inside you, Kale said softly. Yes, Aya admitted. Joe, you shouldn't be, Kale said. He kissed her shoulder. You think you're a bomb waiting to go off, but tonight you were just light. He propped himself up on one elbow and looked down at her. You are not a danger. Aya, you are a miracle. Aya looked at him, her eyes wet. A miracle? Yeah, Kyle said. A miracle. She pulled him down to her, holding him tight, as if he were the only gravity in the universe. The warning klaxon shattered the peace 4 hours later. Proximity alert, the ship's computer announced. Exiting hyperspace in 10 seconds. Kyle and Aya scrambled into their clothes. The tenderness of the bedroom evaporated, replaced by the cold reality of the mission. They rushed to the cockpit. The stars reverted from streaks to points of light. They were in the ghost sector. It was a graveyard. The view screen showed a field of debris that stretched for 1,000,000 miles. Shattered hulks of capital ships, twisted metal and frozen clouds of propellant. It was silent, cold, and utterly dead, and in the center of it, looming like a mountain of black steel, was the Ethel Guard. It was massive, a dreadnought 5 miles long, its hull bristling with silent cannons. It was dark, no running lights, drifting listlessly. There it is, Kyle said. The vault is on the command deck. He initiated the approach vector. I'm scanning for life signs. Nothing. It's cold. It feels loud, Aya whispered. She was gripping the arms of her chair. Loud! Kale checked the comms. I'm getting static. Not on the radio, Aya said. She pressed her hand to her forehead. In my head. They are waking up. Who? Them. Suddenly, the space around Ethelgard shimmered. Kale swore. Cloaking fields. 6 sleek, needle-shaped ships decloaked. They were black, featureless, and terrifyingly fast. They moved in perfect unison, surrounding the Iron Sparrow. Bounty hunters? Kyle asked, his hands flying over the controls, charging shields. No, Aya said. Her voice sounded distant. No pilots. No life support. They are automated interceptors, the Guardians. A voice crackled over the comms. It wasn't human. It was a digital synthesis of 1,000 voices speaking in unison. Commander detected. Designation. Princess Aelira. Protocol Zero initiated. Welcome home. They know you, Kale said. They think you're commanding them. I am, Aya said. Her eyes were beginning to glow violet. They are trying to sync with me. They want orders. Awaiting target solution, the voice boomed. Fleet readiness at 100%. Shall we engage the enemy? What enemy? Kyle asked. Everyone, the voice replied. The galaxy is hostile. Purge protocols available. Aya gasped. Her back arched. The nanites in her body were responding to the massive signal broadcast from the AI fleet. Aya, Kyle shouted. Block them out. It is so strong, she stammered. They are offering me everything. They see the bounty hunters. They see the government. They see the people who hurt me. They can burn them all. Kyle. They can burn them all for me. Her skin was lighting up, the violet lines spreading across her face like a circuit board. Aya, listen to me, Kyle pleaded. That's the weapon talking. That's not you. They are waiting, she whispered. She looked at Kyle, and for a second, her eyes were completely white. No pupils, no irises, just blinding light. They are waiting for the word. Don't say it, Kyle warned. He grabbed her arm. Don't you say it. The Iron Sparrow drifted toward the open hangar bay of the massive dreadnought, guided by a tractor beam they couldn't fight. They were being pulled into the belly of the beast, and the beast was waking up. I can hear them all, Aya said, her voice distorting into a harmonic chorus. 1,000 ships, 1,000,000 missiles, they are all mine. Kyle looked at the woman he loved, and he saw the miracle fading, replaced by the monster she feared. Hold on. Aya, Kale gritted out. I'm getting us to that vault. We are ending this. Today. The ship passed through the magnetic field of the hangar bay. The darkness swallowed them whole. The airlock of the Iron Sparrow hissed open, exhaling a plume of white vapor into the stagnant atmosphere of the dreadnought's hangar bay. The silence that met them was not empty. It was heavy, pressing against the eardrums with the weight of a tomb that had been sealed for 50 years. Kale stepped out first, his blaster raised, the magnetic flashlight clamped to the barrel, cutting a sharp beam through the gloom. The hangar was vast, a cavern of black metal that stretched up into darkness. Rows of dormant interceptors hung from the ceiling like sleeping bats, their hulls coated in a thick layer of gray cosmic dust. Clear, Kyle murmured, though the word felt too small for the space. Aya followed him down the ramp. She was wrapped in her heavy cloak again, but it could not hide the fact that she was trembling. Her eyes were darting around the hangar, not seeing the dust or the dark, but seeing something Kale could not. They are watching, she whispered. The sensors, Kyle asked, scanning the walls. The dead, she replied. She walked past him, her feet moving silently on the metallic deck. As she passed a row of empty flight suits hanging on a rack, she flinched. Flash. For a second, Aya didn't see empty suits. She saw men and women in sharp green uniforms. She saw them laughing, smoking log sticks, checking their helmets before a sortie. She smelled the ozone of charging engines and the sweat of fear. A tall man with a scar on his cheek turned to her, saluting sharply. "Commander on deck," he shouted. Aya gasped and stumbled back. The vision vanished. The suits were empty rags again. "Aya!" Kyle was at her side instantly, steadying her. "I remember them," she said, her voice shaking. "I have never been here, Kale. I was born in a tube, but I remember his face. I remember his name, Lieutenant Koru. He had a daughter on the homeworld." "It's the data," Kale said, his voice grim. "Your father didn't just upload the codes, he uploaded the memories of the fleet. The ghosts are in your blood." "They are so loud," she whimpered, pressing her hands to her temples. "Proceed to the bridge, Commander." The synthesized voice of the ship boomed from overhead speakers, making them both jump. "The throne awaits." "Ignore it," Kyle said. "We are here for the vault. We get the key. We scrub the code. We leave. Stay with me. Aya, don't get lost in the ghosts." They moved deeper into the ship. The corridors were designed for intimidation. High arches of black chrome, lighting that flickered in rhythmic, bioluminescent pulses. Every door they passed slid open automatically at Aya's approach, the ship groaning like a waking beast. As they walked, the hallucinations grew stronger. Aya saw maintenance crews welding bulkheads. She saw officers running with data pads. She felt the vibration of the main cannons firing, a memory of a battle that had happened decades ago. "We are losing shields," a phantom voice screamed in her ear. "It is not real," Aya recited, clutching Kale's arm. "It is not real." "I'm real," Kale said, keeping her grounded. "The floor is real. My hand is real. I'm focused on that." They reached the turbo lift to the command deck. It activated smoothly, whisking them upward through the spine of the ship. When the doors opened, they stepped onto the bridge of the Ethelgard. It was magnificent and terrifying. The view screen was a panoramic window that spanned the entire forward wall, looking out into the debris field of the ghost sector. In the center of the room sat the captain's chair, a throne of raised obsidian, flanked by command consoles that were currently lighting up in a cascade of waking systems. "The vault," Kyle said, pointing to a heavy circular door behind the throne. "It's there." They ran to it. The door had no handle, only a smooth silver indentation in the center, a palm scanner. "It only opens for royal blood," Kale said. "Do it." Aya hesitated. She looked at her hand, still bandaged from the burns. She slowly unwrapped the gauze, revealing the pale skin and the faint silver lines of the circuitry beneath. She pressed her hand to the metal. Identity confirmed. "Welcome, Princess Illyra." The door hissed. Huge locking pins retracted with the sound of gunfire. The heavy metal slab swung inward. The vault was small, sterile, and cold. In the center, bathed in a column of white light, stood a pedestal. On it lay a simple crystalline drive the size of a human finger. It pulsed with a soft, rhythmic blue light. "The override key," Kale breathed. Vorin was telling the truth. He stepped forward to grab it, but Aya stopped him. "Wait," she said. She was looking at a second interface on the pedestal. A holographic display had shimmered to life above the key. It showed two branching paths. One path showed a schematic of a human silhouette, her silhouette, with the nanotech being purged, the silver lines fading, leaving only a normal girl. The other path showed the Ethelgard powering up. It showed the stealth fleet activating. It showed a galaxy map turning Varellan green. "It is not just a key," Aya whispered, reading the alien text that scrolled in the air. "It is a choice. The drive contains the master protocol. I can use it to wipe myself clean, or I can use it to upload the full consciousness of the Empire into the fleet." She reached out, her fingers hovering over the second option. "Kyle," she said, her voice taking on a strange, resonant quality. "Look at the data. The Empire. They weren't just conquerors. They had medicine that could cure death. They had energy sources that could feed every starving world. If I wake the fleet, I could stop the wars. I could stop the hunger." Her eyes began to glow violet. The nanites were surging, feeding her dopamine, feeding her visions of grandeur. "I could stop the people hunting us," she said, turning to him. "Valeric, the bounty hunters. I could burn them all from orbit. We would never have to run again." "Aya," Kale said sharply. He stepped into the vault. "That's the lie. That's the weapon trying to save itself." Is it? Aya asked, tears welled in her glowing eyes. Or is it justice? They hurt me, Kyle. They cut me open. Why shouldn't I hurt them back? Why shouldn't I make sure they never touch anyone else ever again? Kale walked up to the pedestal. He stood between her and the tempting holographic fleet. Because that's not who you are, Kale said softly. You're the girl who fixed a gravedigger because it was singing the wrong song. You're the girl who cried over a dead sandwich. He reached out and took her face in his hands, ignoring the heat radiating from her skin. Revenge is easy, Kale said. I know. I lived in it for 10 years. It eats you. Aya. It hollows you out until there's nothing left but the gun. If you turn on this fleet, you don't save the galaxy. You just become another tyrant, and you lose the one thing you actually fought for. What is that? She whispered. Us, Kyle said. The quiet life, the repair shop, the sandwiches. The violet glow in her eyes flickered. The anger wavered. I don't want to be a tyrant, she sobbed. I just want to be safe. Then pick the key, Kyle said. Delete the code. Be just Aya. She nodded slowly. She reached for the crystalline drive. Clang. The sound of a magnetic boot hitting the metal deck echoed from the bridge. Touching, a cold voice said, but terribly wasteful. Kyle spun around, drawing his blaster. Standing at the entrance of the vault was Director Valeric. She wore a pristine white environmental suit. Her helmet retracted to reveal her sharp, calculating face. She held a heavy stun baton in one hand. Behind her, filling the bridge, were 20 armored mercenaries. They weren't the cybernetic reapers this time. These were corporate shock troops, human soldiers with high-end gear and assault rifles trained on Kale's chest. How? Kale snarled, moving to shield Aya. The nanotech signature, Valeric said, stepping into the room. When she activated the Iron Sparrow's shields in the sewer, she sent out a pulse that lit up sensors 3 sectors away. You can't hide a star, Mr. Kale, no matter how much dirt you bury it in. She looked at Aya, ignoring Kale completely. Subject 0, Valeric said, her voice like silk over glass. Step away from the pedestal. You are malfunctioning that we need to get you back to the lab for recalibration. I am not a subject, Aya said. Her voice was stronger now. My name is Aya. Your name is Asset 404, Valeric corrected. And you are property of the Galactic Coalition Intelligence Division. Now, step away from the console, or we will liquidate your pet mechanic. She signaled. The 20 rifles clicked off their safeties. Kyle tightened his grip on his blaster. He did the math. 20 shooters, 1 door, no cover. Aya, Kyle whispered without moving his lips. Grab the key. If she touches that key, Valeric said, I will order my men to fire. You will be dead before she can initiate the protocol. The standoff stretched. The air in the vault was electric. You want the fleet, Aya realized. She looked at Valeric with sudden clarity. You don't want to destroy the Virilan weapons. You want to take them. Peace requires a big stick. Valeric smiled, thin and cruel. The coalition is weak, fragmented. With this fleet, I can unify the systems. I can bring order, just like your father wanted. I am fulfilling his legacy. You are a parasite, Kale spat, and you are a distraction. Valeric sighed. Kill him. No! Aya screamed. The violence erupted in a split second. Kale fired first, putting a bolt through the visor of the nearest mercenary. He dove to the right, sliding behind the heavy obsidian throne just as the air filled with plasma fire. Bolts chewed up the floor where he had been standing. Molten metal sprayed the room. Secure the asset, Valeric shouted, retreating behind her wall of soldiers. Do not damage the console. The mercenaries advanced, firing suppression bursts to keep Kale pinned. He returned fire blindly, taking down another soldier, but he was hopelessly outgunned. A grazing shot caught him in the left shoulder, spinning him around. He cried out, collapsing against the dark metal of the throne. "Kael!" Aya yelled. She was still standing by the pedestal. The soldiers were ignoring her, focused on killing the threat. "Stop it!" Aya commanded. She raised her hands. The violet light exploded from her body. She didn't create a shield this time. She lashed out. A tendril of pure energy whipped across the room, catching 3 mercenaries and hurling them into the far wall with bone-crushing force. "Use the dampeners!" Valeric shrieked. 4 soldiers leveled strange, bulky weapons at Aya. They fired. Instead of plasma, they fired concentrated blasts of sonic disruption waves. The sound hit Aya like a physical blow. It disrupted her concentration, scrambling the nanotech communication. She screamed, clutching her head, the violet light sputtering and dying. She fell to her knees. "Grab her!" Valeric ordered. 2 soldiers rushed forward, grabbing Aya by the arms. She kicked and thrashed, but the sonic weapons kept her disoriented, unable to focus her power. Kale looked up from behind the throne. He was bleeding from his shoulder. He saw them dragging her away. He saw Valeric walking toward the pedestal, toward the fleet controls. He couldn't let that happen. Kale gritted his teeth against the pain. He grabbed a grenade from his belt, an old thermal detonator he had saved for a special occasion. He pulled the pin and rolled it, not at the soldiers, at the console. "Incoming!" a mercenary yelled. Valeric saw the grenade skittering toward the precious data. Her eyes went wide. She dove away. Boom! The explosion rocked the vault. It didn't destroy the pedestal. Virelin engineering was too tough for that. But the shockwave knocked the soldiers holding Aya off their feet. Aya scrambled free. She didn't run for cover. She ran for the pedestal. The smoke cleared. The holographic display was flickering but active. "Aya!" Kale shouted, firing his pistol to cover her. "Do it! Now!" Aya grabbed the crystalline drive. She jammed it into the interface slot, but she didn't select the delete option immediately. She looked at the soldiers recovering their footing. She looked at Valeric, who was rising from the floor, face twisted in fury. She looked at Kale, bleeding and pinned down. If she deleted the code, she would lose her power. She would be just a girl, defenseless. If she activated the fleet, the automated defenses would slaughter these men in seconds. She could save Kale effortlessly. The temptation roared in her blood. Use the weapon. Save him. "Don't do it, Aya!" Kyle yelled, seeing the hesitation. "Don't become them." Aya looked at Kale. She saw the fear in his eyes, not fear of dying, but fear of losing her to the darkness. She made her choice. "I am not a weapon," she whispered. She slammed her hand onto the console, executing the purge command. "No!" Valeric screamed. A shockwave of white light erupted from the pedestal. It wasn't violent. It was silent and blindingly pure. It washed over Aya first. She arched her back, gasping as the nanotech was ripped from her system. The silver lines on her skin flared one last time and then burned out, turning to ash that flaked away. The violet glow in her eyes faded, leaving them a soft, human pink. The voices in her head, the ghosts, the fleet, the ancestors screamed once and were silenced. The wave expanded outward. It hit the Ethel Guard. The lights on the bridge died. The humming of the engines stopped. The massive dreadnought groaned as it became truly, finally dead. Outside the window, the 6 stealth interceptors that had been waiting for orders powered down, their running lights winking out. They were just drifting metal now. Silence fell over the bridge. The emergency lights flickered on, casting the room in a dull red gloom. Aya slumped against the pedestal. She felt heavy. Weak, cold, she was empty. "You stupid, little creature," Valeric hissed. The director stood up. She looked at the dead console. She looked at her ruined plans. Her face was a mask of cold, calculating hatred. She pulled a sleek chrome pistol from her holster. "If I can't have the weapon," Valeric said, aiming at Aya's chest, "then I will burn the casing." Aya couldn't move. She was drained. She looked down the barrel of the gun. Valeric pulled the trigger. The sound was deafening in the silence. Aya flinched, waiting for the impact, waiting for the end. But the impact never came. A dark shape had blurred in front of her. Cale. He had moved the second he saw Valeric raise the gun. He didn't have time to fire. He only had time to throw himself into the path of the bullet. The shot hit him in the center of the chest. It wasn't a plasma bolt. It was a solid slug, designed to shred armor. It punched through his jacket and exited his back in a spray of red. Cale jerked violently. He stumbled backward, crashing into Aya. They both fell to the floor. "Cale!" Aya screamed. It was a raw, tearing sound. Valeric raised the gun again for a second shot, but suddenly the bridge wall exploded inward. Debris showered the room. A squad of heavily armed figures in mismatched armor rappelled through the breach. "Resistance!" one of them shouted. "Clear the room!" It was Cale's backup. The distress beacon had worked. The mercenaries, disoriented and cut off, scattered. A firefight erupted, chaotic and loud. Valeric snarled, firing 2 wild shots before turning and sprinting for the emergency exit. Her soldiers covering her retreat. Aya didn't see any of it. The world had narrowed down to the man lying in her lap. "Cale," she sobbed, pressing her hands against the wound in his chest. The blood was hot and sticky. There was so much of it. "Kyle, look at me." Kyle's eyes fluttered open. They were glassy, unfocused. His breath was coming in wet, bubbling rasps. Did it work?" he wheezed. "Yes," Aya cried, tears streaming down her face, mixing with the dust on her cheeks. "It worked. The fleet is gone. I'm just me. I'm just Aya." "Good," Kyle whispered. A faint, bloody smile touched his lips. "Good. You promised," she said, her voice breaking. "You promised you would stay. You said you were stuck to me like rust." "Trying," Cale gasped. He coughed, blood flecking his lips. "Harder than it looks." His hand fumbled, trying to find hers. She grabbed it. His grip was weak. His skin was getting cold. "Don't go," she begged. "Please, I don't know how to be human without you. I don't know how to dance." "You'll learn," Cale breathed. His eyes were starting to drift. The light behind them was fading. "No!" Aya screamed. She leaned down, pressing her forehead against his. She searched inside herself for nanotech. She reached for the power that could fix tissue, the power that could restart hearts. She reached for the weapon, but there was nothing, just silence. She had deleted the miracle. She couldn't save him. "Cale!" She pulled back. He wasn't breathing. His chest was still. Panic, cold and absolute, seized her. She shook him. "Stay!" she shouted, "and stay!" He didn't move. She remembered the word from the dream. The word that the old memories had taught her meant more than just remaining. It meant an imperative command to the soul. She threw her head back and screamed it, a guttural, desperate cry that echoed off the dead metal walls of the bridge. "Shay!" The word hung in the air. Suddenly, the comms unit on Cale's belt crackled. "Cale, this is Jaro." The Twi'lek's voice cut through the static. "We've cleared the hangar. The structure is failing. The core is destabilizing. Get out of there." A large hand grabbed Aya's shoulder. It was the resistance leader, a scarred woman with a plasma rifle. "He's down," the woman said, checking Cale's pulse. She paused. "There's a thread, a faint one, We have a stasis pod on the shuttle, but we have to go now. Save him, Aya whispered, staring at Kale's gray face. Grab him, the leader shouted to her team. Two soldiers scooped Kale up. They ran toward the hull breach. Aya scrambled up and followed, her legs shaking. The Ethel Guard was dying around them. The delete command had done more than wipe the software. It had unlocked the magnetic containment of the ship's ancient reactor. The floor buckled, pipes burst, spraying steam. They sprinted through the collapsing corridors, dodging falling beams. The roar of the dying ship was deafening. They reached the resistance shuttle, a heavy dropship clamped to the hull. They threw Kale's body into the back. Aya dove in after him. Punch it, the leader yelled to the pilot. The dropship detached. Its engines screamed as it peeled away from the dreadnought. Seconds later, the Ethel Guard imploded. It didn't explode outward. It collapsed inward, crushed by the weight of its own gravity as the singularity core failed. The massive black ship crumpled like a tin can, folding in on itself until it was nothing but a dense point of superheated matter. And then, nothing. A flash of light, and it was gone. Aya sat on the floor of the dropship, covered in Kale's blood. She watched the empty space where her heritage, her power, and her curse had been. It was over. She turned to the stasis pod. Kale was inside, suspended in blue gel. He looked pale, lifeless. The monitor on the side of the pod beeped with a slow, irregular rhythm. Beep, beep, beep. It was the only sound in the universe that mattered. Aya placed her hand on the cold glass. She didn't have her nanotech. She didn't have her magic. She only had the prayer of a girl who had learned to love in a war zone. Shay, she whispered against the glass. Please, Shay. The return of consciousness did not happen all at once. It was a slow, agonizing climb up a gravity well, pulling himself hand over hand out of the dark. For a long time, there was only the sound, a rhythmic, electronic beeping. It was annoying. Kyle wanted to find the source and smash it with a wrench, but his arms felt like they were made of lead. He tried to move his fingers, but the signal got lost somewhere between his brain and his hand. Then came the smell. Kale expected the smell of ozone. He expected the copper tang of blood, the burning plastic of the Ethel Guard's bridge, or the sterile chemical reek of a med bay on a warship. Instead, he smelled rain, not the acid rain of Iridian 9 that smelled like sulfur and rotten eggs. This was real rain, clean water hitting warm soil. He smelled something sweet, like blooming jasmine, and the faint, comforting aroma of brewing coffee. He forced his eyes open. The light was white but soft, filtered through a translucent curtain that danced in a gentle breeze. He blinked, his eyelids scraping over dry corneas. He was in bed. A real bed with sheets that felt like cotton, not synthetic fiber. The room was simple, plastered in soothing cream tones. To his right, a large window stood open, revealing a sky that was a shocking, vibrant turquoise. He tried to speak, but his throat was a desert. He managed a dry croak. "You are awake." The voice came from the chair beside the window. Kyle turned his head. The movement sent a spike of pain through his chest, sharp enough to make him hiss, but dull enough to tell him he was alive. Aya was sitting there. For a moment, Kyle did not recognize her. The girl he had pulled out of the alley had been a creature of sharp angles, frantic energy, and glowing, terrified eyes. She had been a construct of silver lines and violet light. The woman sitting in the chair was human. Her hair had grown out. The chaotic, bioluminescent mess was gone, replaced by a soft, shoulder-length bob of pale blonde that caught the sunlight. She wore a simple tunic of blue linen and loose trousers. Her feet were bare. But the biggest change was the silence. Kale had gotten used to the low-level hum that radiated from her, the static electricity that made the hair on his arm stand up whenever she was emotional. Now, there was nothing. She was quiet, solid, real. She stood up and walked to the bedside. She moved with a grace that was no longer predatory or jerky, but fluid and calm. She poured a glass of water from a pitcher and held it to his lips. "Drink," she said softly. Slowly. Kyle drank. The water was cold and tasted like heaven. He coughed, the liquid soothing the fire in his throat. "Where?" Kale rasped. "Silverus," Aya said. "It is a moon in the mid-rim territories. Neutral space. Very boring. You will hate it." Kyle looked at her. He looked at her arms. The sleeves of her tunic were rolled up. The scars were there, faint, silvery traceries where the nanotech had burned its way out. But the skin was pink and healthy. There were no ports, no glowing veins. "The fleet?" Kyle asked. "Gone," Aya said. She set the glass down. "I crushed it. It is just dust in the ghost sector now." "And the thing inside you?" "Gone," she repeated. She sat on the edge of the bed and took his hand. Her skin was warm, not fever-hot, not cryo-cold, just human warmth. "I am empty, Kyle. The voices are quiet. The maps are gone. I cannot hear the ships anymore." She looked down at their joined hands. "I am just Aya." Kyle squeezed her fingers. His grip was weak, but he put everything he had into it. "Just Aya," he whispered. "That is plenty." She looked up at him then, and he saw the pink in her irises. The unnatural silver sheen had faded, leaving eyes that were bright, expressive, and filled with tears. "You died," she said, her voice trembling. "On the shuttle. Your heart stopped. The medics. They had to shock you 3 times. I thought you had broken your promise. I'm a mechanic." Kale managed a weak smile. "I'm hard to scrap." She leaned forward and rested her forehead against his shoulder, careful of the bandages wrapped around his chest. He felt her shake. "You stayed," she whispered. "I told you," Kyle said, closing his eyes as the exhaustion dragged him back down. Stuck like rust, recovery was a slow, frustrating business. Kyle had taken a high-caliber slug through the chest. It had missed his heart by 2 millimeters, shattered a rib, and collapsed a lung. On Iridian 9, they would have slapped a cybernetic patch on it and sent him back to work in 2 days. Here, on Silverus. The doctors believed in natural healing. It took 6 weeks before he could walk without a cane. It took another 2 before he could lift a hydrospanner without his hand shaking. But he had help. Aya never left him. She was his nurse, his crutch, and his silence. She learned how to change his dressings with the same obsessive focus she had once used to repair starship engines. They lived in a small bungalow on the edge of a cliff overlooking the violet oceans of Silverus. It was a quiet world, agricultural and sleepy, far from the trade lanes and the politics of the core systems. The war, the brief, terrifying skirmish in the ghost sector, had faded into rumor. The news feeds called it a freak gravimetric anomaly that had destroyed a debris field. The Galactic Coalition, embarrassed by the loss of their Black Ops team and the rogue director Valeric, had buried the truth deep in classified files. Subject 0 was officially listed as destroyed. Aya had a new name now. On her identification card, she was Lyra Vance, a refugee from a colony world. But to Kale, she was always Aya. As his strength returned, the itch to work returned with it. Kale was not a man who could sit on a porch and watch the sun set for the rest of his life. His hands needed grease. His mind needed problems to solve. They found an old, abandoned hangar on the outskirts of the nearest settlement, a town called Oakhaven. It was a rusted shell, overgrown with ivy and filled with birds' nests. "It is perfect," Aya declared, standing in the center of the dusty floor. "It's a ruin," Kyle argued, leaning on his cane. "The roof leaks. The power coupling is from the Dark Ages, and there are birds living in the ventilation." "We will fix it," she said. She looked at him, her eyes dancing. "Unless the great Kale has forgotten how to use a welder?" Kale grunted. "I haven't forgotten. I'm just lazy." They bought it for a song. They spent the next month clearing it out. Kale fixed the roof and rewired the power grid. Aya cleaned the scrubbers and painted the walls. They opened Skyline Repair on Tuesday. It wasn't a Starship garage. Oakhaven didn't get starships. It got atmospheric hoppers, agricultural drones, and heavy-duty transport bikes used by the local farmers. The work was simple. No hyperdrives, no shield generators, just combustion engines and repulsor lifts. Kale loved it. He stood at his workbench, the warm breeze blowing through the open bay doors, working on the carburetor of a dusty hover bike. The sun was shining. There was no smog, no bounty hunters. "Hand me the 3mm driver," he said, not looking up. A tool was pressed into his hand instantly. "Thanks," he said. He turned to look at Aya. She was working at the smaller bench he had set up for her. She was surrounded by a group of 4 local children, their faces smudged with dirt, their eyes wide with fascination. Aya was holding a data pad that she had taken apart. "You see this chip?" Aya explained, pointing with a slender finger. "It is the brain. It thinks in yes and no, 0 and 1. But sometimes, if it gets too hot, it gets confused. It starts saying maybe. And that is why your game froze." "Can you fix it, Lyra?" a little boy with a missing tooth asked. "I can," Aya smiled. "But you are going to help me. Hold this wire." Kyle watched her. She was patient. She was kind. The terrifying intelligence that had once calculated firing solutions for 1,000 warships was now being used to teach a 6-year-old how to solder a circuit board. She looked up and caught his eye. She flashed him a smile, bright, unburdened, and entirely hers. Kale felt a lump in his throat. He turned back to the carburetor, blinking rapidly. "Damn dust," he muttered. Life settled into a rhythm. Morning coffee on the porch, the ride into town on their refurbished skiff, the smell of ozone and lubricant in the shop, dinner at the local pub where Kale complained about the local sports team and Aya listened to the old fishermen tell tall tales. She was learning to be human. It was a process of trial and error. She discovered she hated the texture of mushrooms. She discovered she loved the feeling of rain on her face. She learned that sarcasm was a language of affection, not an insult. But she still had moments. Sometimes, Kale would wake up in the middle of the night and find her standing on the balcony, staring up at the stars. She wouldn't be moving. She would just be watching, her body rigid. He knew what she was looking for. She was looking for the connection, the constant stream of data that had been her companion since birth. The silence of her own mind was still loud to her. One night, 6 months after they had arrived, Kyle found her out there. The wind was whipping her robe around her legs. He walked up behind her and wrapped a blanket around her shoulders. "They are not calling you," Kyle said softly. "I know," Aya said. She didn't turn around. "It is strange. I used to know where every ship in the sector was. I knew the temperature of the stars. Now, I only know what I can see." Is it enough? Kyle asked. She turned to him. She reached up and touched the scar on his chest, the puckered mark where the bullet had gone in. It is quiet, she said. I like the quiet. It lets me hear you. She leaned her head against his chest. I missed the music today. The radio in the shop was broken. I'll fix it tomorrow, Kale promised. No, she said. Teach me again. The dancing. I want to get it right this time. Without the gravity failure. Kale smiled. He took her hand on the dark balcony. There was no music, only the sound of the ocean crashing against the cliffs below. Left foot, right foot, he whispered. They moved together in the dark, slow and clumsy. Two broken things that had learned how to mend each other. The meteor shower happened in late autumn. It was a localized event, the tail end of a comet passing through the upper atmosphere of Silverus. The news feed said it would be spectacular. Kale closed the shop early. He packed a basket with real food, cheese, bread, fruit, and a bottle of wine that cost more than he used to make in a month on Iridian 9. Where are we going? Aya asked as he led her up the steep path behind their bungalow. Top of the ridge, Kyle said. Best view in the hemisphere. They sat on a blanket in the tall grass. The air was crisp, hinting at the coming winter. Below them, the lights of Oakhaven twinkled like grounded stars. Above, the sky was a vast velvet canvas. The show started slowly. A single streak of green fire cut across the darkness. Then another. Magnesium, Aya noted, pointing at the green streak. Burning up at high velocity. Don't analyze it, Kyle nudged her. Just look at it. I am looking, she said. It is inefficient. All that matters burning away for no purpose. Beauty is the purpose, Kale said. He poured the wine into 2 tin cups. Then the sky opened up. Dozens. Then hundreds of meteors streaked overhead. Blue, gold, green, and white. It was a waterfall of light. It was violent and silent and breathtaking. Aya went quiet. She watched the sky with wide eyes. She wasn't analyzing anymore. She was just watching. The light reflected in her eyes, turning them into pools of shifting color. She looked ethereal again, almost like the girl he had found in the alley, but without the fear. She turned to him, tearing her gaze away from the celestial fire. Kale, she said. Yeah? That night, she started, her voice thoughtful. In the alley, you were tired. You were angry at the world. You had 42 credits in your account. Kale chuckled. You checked my balance? I checked everything, she admitted with a small smile. You were a man who wanted to be left alone. You had a gun under the table. You could have stunned me. You could have called the authorities. You could have ignored me. She paused, picking at a blade of grass. Why did you feed me that sandwich? Kale looked at her. He looked at the way the starlight caught the curve of her cheek. He thought back to that night, the smell of garbage, the hopelessness, the sudden appearance of a girl who looked like she had fallen from a fairy tale into a gutter. He remembered her eyes, not the alien geometry of them, but the hunger, the sheer desperate need for a moment of kindness. He shrugged, swirling the wine in his cup. Because I wanted to see you smile, Kale said simply. You looked like you hadn't smiled in 100 years. Aya stared at him. She processed the data. It wasn't a tactical decision, it wasn't a logical transaction, it was just human. I hadn't, she whispered. I didn't know how. She shifted on the blanket, moving closer to him until her side was pressed against his. She took the cup from his hand and set it down in the grass. Then marry me, she said. Kyle blinked. He felt his heart skip a beat, a sensation he hadn't felt since the war. What? Marry me, she repeated, her voice firm, decisive. That is the human protocol, correct? When two units function better together than apart? When they want to share resources and data until termination? Kyle laughed, a loud barking sound that startled a sleeping bird nearby. That is the most romantic description of marriage I have ever heard. I am serious, Aya said. She poked him in the chest. Feed me every day. I don't care if it is sandwiches. I don't care if it is protein paste. Just be there. Be the one who hands it to me. Kyle looked at her. He saw the future in her eyes. Not a future of running. Not a future of explosions or starships or hiding in sewers. He saw mornings in the shop. He saw evenings on this hill. He saw arguments about what to watch on the holovid. He saw growing old. He saw a life that was small, quiet, and infinitely valuable. He reached up and cupped her face. His hand was rough, calloused, stained with grease that would never fully wash out. Her skin was smooth, perfect, and healed. Okay, Kyle said. His voice was thick. Okay, I'll marry you but I'm warning you, I snore. I know. Aya smiled, and it was the smile he had wanted to see that first night, radiant, genuine, and full of light. I find the frequency soothing. She leaned in. They kissed, silhouetted against the backdrop of the falling stars. It wasn't an earth-shattering kiss. It didn't disable a spaceport or rewrite a galactic treaty. It was soft. It tasted of cheap wine and cold air. It was a kiss between a mechanic and a former weapon who had both decided to put down their armor. Above them, the universe continued to burn, vast and indifferent. Empires would rise and fall. Wars would be fought. Stars would die in violent supernovas. But here, on a quiet hill on a forgotten moon, two people held on to each other. They had chosen survival. They had chosen the sandwich. And in the end, that was the only victory that mattered. Let's go home, Kyle whispered against her lips. Yes, Aya said. Home. They stood up, gathered their blanket, and walked down the hill together, hand in hand, leaving the darkness behind them.